There are moments in television history that feel scripted, polished, controlled down to the second. And then there are moments like this, when something slips. When the mask cracks. When a routine interview turns into something no one in the room is prepared for. This was one of those nights. It started like any other. The lights inside the Ed Sullivan Theater burned warm and golden, casting that familiar late-night glow across rows of expectant faces. The air carried a mix of excitement and studio chill, that faint hum of anticipation that always lingers before a live taping. Audience members whispered to each other, adjusting jackets, checking phones one last time before showtime. Some had waited months for these tickets. Tonight was supposed to be easy. Entertaining. Predictable. Up on stage, everything was perfectly in place. The desk gleamed under the spotlight. The city skyline backdrop shimmered with artificial stars. And just off stage, the band tuned their instruments with quiet precision. Every detail rehearsed. Every movement timed. Backstage, though, something felt off. Denzel Washington stood near the curtain, calm on the surface, but observant as ever. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket slowly, methodically, the kind of movement that comes from decades of composure under pressure. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were alert, scanning. His publicist stood a few feet away, her posture tighter than usual, her phone clutched a little too firmly in her hand. She had overheard things. Fragments of conversation. The writing team. The tone. The shift. This wasn't going to be a standard interview. She glanced toward Denzel, hesitated, then said nothing. Across the stage, Stephen Colbert delivered his monologue to roaring laughter. The audience responded exactly as expected, sharp bursts of applause, waves of approval rolling through the room. He was in control. Confident. Energized. But beneath that confidence, there was intention. Something sharper. Something waiting. When the band hit the final note and Colbert turned toward the camera with that familiar grin, the audience leaned forward slightly in their seats. This was the moment they had come for. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice smooth and practiced, "my next guest is an Academy Award-winning actor, director, and one of the most respected figures in Hollywood." Applause erupted. "Please welcome Denzel Washington." And then he walked out. Denzel stepped onto the stage with that unmistakable presence, calm, grounded, almost magnetic. He smiled, nodded to the audience, shook Colbert's hand with measured warmth, and took his seat. For a moment, everything was perfect. The crowd settled. The energy softened. The conversation began exactly as it should. Light banter. A few laughs. Colbert leaned back casually, tossing out jokes about Denzel's legendary discipline. Denzel responded with quiet humor, his voice smooth, controlled, effortlessly engaging. The audience relaxed. Smiles spread. This was what they expected. Safe. Professional. Seamless. Then Colbert shifted. It was subtle. Almost invisible, unless you were watching closely. He leaned forward just slightly. His smile lingered, but his eyes sharpened. "So, Denzel," he began, voice lighter than the weight of the question he was about to ask. "This new film, it deals with forgiveness, redemption, some heavy themes." Denzel nodded. Colbert continued, "Given your faith, how much of that comes from your personal beliefs?" "A fair question." Denzel didn't hesitate. "Well," he said calmly, "faith gives people a framework. It's not about perfection, it's about understanding, growth, trying to be better than you were yesterday." The audience murmured softly. Appreciative. But Colbert didn't lean back. He leaned in further. And that's when the temperature in the room shifted. "Right," Colbert said, tilting his head slightly. "But don't you think there's something interesting about that?" Denzel's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Interesting how?" Colbert smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. You talk about faith, values, morality. But you've been, noticeably quiet on certain issues. Big ones. A pause. The audience grew still. Denzel didn't respond immediately. He studied Colbert for a second longer than necessary. What kind of issues, he asked. Colbert didn't hesitate. Marriage equality. Reproductive rights. Religion in politics. The words landed heavier than expected. A ripple moved through the audience, not loud, not obvious, but felt. Denzel leaned back slightly, his posture still composed, but something had changed. I don't think silence is what you think it is, he said carefully. Not everything has to be turned into a public statement. Colbert tilted his head again, pressing. But when you have influence, doesn't silence become a statement? Another shift. Smaller this time, but sharper. Denzel's fingers rested on the arm of his chair, tapping once. Barely noticeable. But deliberate. I don't see it that way, he replied. My job isn't to tell people what to think. It's to live my life honestly. The audience was no longer relaxed. Some leaned forward. Others exchanged glances. Colbert saw it. And he pushed. But you talk about values, he said, voice tightening just slightly. Don't people deserve to know what those values actually mean when it comes to real-world issues? That was the moment. The exact moment. When the interview stopped being an interview, and started becoming something else. Denzel's expression changed, not dramatically, not theatrically, but unmistakably. The warmth faded. Replaced by something colder. Sharper. Measured. Are we talking about the film, he asked quietly, or are we doing something different here? A nervous laugh flickered through the audience. Colbert didn't laugh. I'm asking real questions, he said. And I'm giving real answers, Denzel replied. The tension snapped tighter. You could feel it now. In the silence between words. In the way the audience stopped reacting instinctively. In the way the air itself seemed heavier. Backstage, Denzel's publicist stepped closer to the curtain, her eyes fixed on the stage. Something was going wrong. And fast. On stage, Colbert leaned forward again, his voice losing its softness. But you can't have it both ways, he said. You can't claim moral grounding through faith and avoid the conversations that come with it. There it was. Not a question. A challenge. Denzel's jaw tightened. Who says I'm avoiding anything, he asked. Colbert didn't blink. Your silence does. The audience went completely still. No laughter. No applause. Just, quiet. Denzel exhaled slowly. His gaze didn't leave Colbert's. And when he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower. Sharper. Controlled, but carrying something beneath it. Or maybe, he said, I just don't feel the need to perform my beliefs on command. A few scattered claps broke out, hesitant, uncertain. Colbert didn't acknowledge them. Instead, he leaned even closer, his tone now unmistakably confrontational. Or maybe you just don't want to deal with the consequences of saying what you really believe. And just like that, the line had been crossed. Denzel didn't move. Didn't blink. But something behind his eyes shifted, completely. The kind of shift you only see right before something breaks. The audience felt it. Backstage, his publicist whispered under her breath, please, don't let this go further, but it already had. Denzel leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, almost too calm. Let me ask you something, Stephen, he said. A pause. A beat. Are you trying to understand me, or are you trying to corner me? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. And for the first time that night, Colbert didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. Tension thickened. And somewhere in that moment, everyone in the room realized the same thing. This wasn't going to end well. And it was only just beginning. The air in the Ed Sullivan Theater had changed. It was heavier now, thick with anticipation, almost electric, as if every spotlight and microphone was silently holding its breath. The audience's earlier laughter had faded into a tense murmur, small pockets of coughs and shifting seats betraying their discomfort. The warm glow of the studio lights now seemed harsher, almost accusatory, casting long shadows across Colbert's desk and Denzel's statuesque figure. The temperature felt colder, though no thermostat had changed. This was the cold of mounting tension, the chill of civility breaking down in real time. Denzel Washington's hands rested lightly on his chair, fingers stretching but not fidgeting. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed together in the faintest line, the way someone might hold a secret too long without letting it escape. His eyes, however, remained sharp, scanning Colbert with quiet calculation. Every twitch, every small gesture from the host was catalogued, weighed, and assessed. Colbert, on the other hand, was leaning forward with a rigid energy, one hand gripping the edge of his desk as if to anchor himself in a reality he could no longer control. His practiced calm had begun to fracture in the micro-expressions, the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the rapid blink, the shallow inhale that betrayed rising agitation. "So, let's talk about your faith," Colbert said, voice lighter than his intent. It was a trap disguised as casual conversation. "You've spoken about your Christian beliefs for years. That's admirable. But, there's more, isn't there? Some might argue you sidestep certain, controversial topics. Gay marriage, reproductive rights, political involvement. Isn't that silence telling?" The words landed with a deliberate weight. Denzel's eyes narrowed, just a flicker, almost imperceptible, but enough for those watching closely to notice. The audience shifted, sensing the unspoken challenge. Denzel inhaled slowly, exhaling with the calm steadiness of a man used to facing scrutiny. His voice, when it came, was deliberate, smooth, and firm. "Silence doesn't always mean agreement," he said. "Not every conversation has to be public. Not every belief requires performance. My work, my films, they speak louder than any soundbite could. My faith is my compass. That's what guides me. Not a camera. Not applause." Colbert's posture stiffened, a small flash of frustration crossing his features. He leaned back, tapping a finger against his desk. "But, surely, with your influence, staying quiet sends a message. People expect clarity. They expect moral accountability. You've built an image, a persona that inspires. Isn't it your responsibility to speak on these matters?" Denzel paused. The audience sensed it immediately. Every inhale, every subtle tilt of his head, every micro shift in posture was magnified under the harsh glare of live television scrutiny. He wasn't reacting in haste. He was considering, measuring, before he struck. "My responsibility," he said slowly, "is to treat people with dignity. To live truthfully. To set an example through my craft, through how I interact with the world. Not through someone else's definition of political correctness or moral obligation." The studio was now entirely silent. Even the faint hum of equipment seemed to fade. Colbert's hands twitched slightly. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain control, but his voice, when he spoke, carried a sharper edge. "So you're saying that ignoring social issues is acceptable?" he asked, leaning closer, voice low but pointed. Denzel's head tilted just slightly. The slightest lift of an eyebrow. It was a look of incredulity without aggression. Yet the intensity in his voice carried a weight no one could ignore. "I'm saying you misunderstand what respect looks like," Denzel replied. "Respect isn't performing a checklist of positions for an audience. Respect is integrity. Treating people decently, regardless of their background, their beliefs, or their identity. That's what my faith teaches me. That's what I live by." The camera lingered on Colbert for a beat too long. His mouth opened, closed. Words faltered. Behind him, the control room exchanged nervous glances, the producer's hands flew over consoles in silent panic, trying to anticipate the fallout. The audience was leaning forward now, collectively holding their breath. Some were shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to cheer or recoil, others transfixed, caught in the spectacle of a man holding his ground. Colbert, sensing the momentum slipping, forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, Denzel. You can't dodge this. Your platform gives you influence. You can't pretend it doesn't come with responsibility." Denzel straightened in his chair, voice lowering, carrying the kind of calm authority that filled the room like a tangible presence. Responsibility isn't about yielding to pressure. It's not about giving into someone else's narrative. I came here to talk about a film. I did not come here to be trapped into serving someone else's agenda. The subtle movement in the audience intensified. Some leaned back, uneasy, others exchanged whispered glances. The studio temperature felt oppressive. Every spotlight, every camera angle, seemed to exaggerate the silent standoff. The rhythm of television, the expected cadence of laughter, applause, and light-hearted banter, was gone. In its place, tension so thick it seemed to hum. Colbert's voice hardened, a flicker of the persona he maintained for decades slipping. "So what, then? Are you saying that talking about your beliefs is off-limits? That challenging your own positions, your moral authority, isn't necessary?" Denzel's gaze didn't waver. His hand rose slightly, tapping once against his thigh, a micro-gesture loaded with quiet control. "You invited me here under false pretenses. You told my team this was about the film. Instead, you turned it into an ambush. That's not conversation. That's theater at someone else's expense." The camera caught every subtle reaction. Colbert's jaw tightened. He looked like he might rise from his chair, his gestures beginning to mirror the tension in his voice. Denzel remained seated but commanding. Each breath deliberate. Each word measured. "You think I came here to be a punching bag for political theater?" Denzel continued, voice carrying over the now rigid audience. "I am here to share my work. To honor the effort, the story, the people who made this film possible. You decided this evening that wasn't enough." Colbert's face flushed. He waved his hands subtly, as if to regain balance, but the gestures only made the confrontation more vivid. "I'm asking questions about influence. About moral responsibility. That's fair." Denzel leaned forward slightly, eyes locking onto Colbert. The audience leaned in with him. His voice dropped into a controlled, almost cinematic cadence. "Fair," he said, slow and deliberate, "would be treating me with basic respect. Fair would be honoring what you promised in advance. What you are doing is using my faith, my character, my words, as entertainment. That's not fair. That's ambush. That's cowardice masquerading as journalism." The word landed like a hammer. Silence fell. The lights overhead seemed brighter, exposing every expression, every micro-reaction. Colbert's hands twitched on the desk. His breath became slightly shallow, the air thick with tension. The studio was suspended in a fragile, electrified pause. Denzel's publicist, standing just beyond the curtain, felt her stomach tighten. She could see the signs of escalation. This was more than a heated conversation, it was about to become historic. Colbert, sensing the weight of the moment and the loss of control, attempted one last maneuver, his voice rising in desperation. "You want respect? Then answer the questions. Don't hide behind platitudes." Denzel rose from his chair. Slow. Deliberate. Every movement cinematic, measured, commanding. The stage seemed to shrink around Colbert as Denzel's presence dominated the room. "I am not hiding," Denzel said, his voice carrying a chill that rippled across the theater. "I am choosing dignity over your performance. I am choosing integrity over your spectacle. And I am walking away from this circus before you degrade it further." Gasps erupted from the audience. Some stood, unsure if they should intervene or simply watch history unfold. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every tense, breathless second. Denzel took a step toward the exit. His coat settled naturally on his shoulders, the stage lights reflecting subtly off the fabric. He paused. Turned. Eyes piercing directly into Colbert's. "Respect, Stephen," he said, quiet but sharp, "is earned through action, not demanded through manipulation. Something you might want to learn." Colbert's face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, rage, humiliation, disbelief, all on display. Behind the camera, the crew held their breath, unsure whether the show would recover. Denzel walked off the stage, leaving behind a theater suspended in stunned silence, a host undone, and an audience that had witnessed the collapse of a broadcast in real time. And as he disappeared behind the curtain, the weight of the moment settled over the studio. This wasn't a routine interview anymore. This was a reckoning. The audience exhaled collectively. Some in awe, some in disbelief, some shaking their heads. The lights dimmed for a commercial break, but the echo of confrontation lingered. The tension hadn't dissipated, it had evolved. The world outside would soon take notice. Clips would circulate. Social media would erupt. Public opinion would be split, debated, dissected. But in that moment, backstage, Denzel's team simply breathed. He had walked through chaos with unbroken poise. And Colbert, well, he was left with nothing but the remnants of his own unraveling. The lights in the Ed Sullivan Theater seemed harsher now, almost accusatory, as if reflecting back the tension that had just erupted. The usual warmth of the studio, the glow that makes television feel intimate and inviting, was gone, replaced by a stark, almost sterile brightness that highlighted every crease in Colbert's forehead, every tight line in Denzel's jaw. The air had a metallic edge, a nervous energy that lingered, thick and unrelenting. The audience no longer shifted in idle amusement, they were witnesses to something raw, electric, historic. Denzel paused at the edge of the stage, his 6-foot frame silhouetted against the backlight of the curtain. For a heartbeat, he considered turning back, letting the confrontation continue, letting the stage become a battleground. But the weight of integrity, the gravity of his own principles, held him in place. He adjusted his jacket, subtly, with that effortless grace he carried like armor. His eyes scanned the audience, faces frozen in a mixture of awe, shock, and uncertainty, and then back to Colbert. "You know what, Stephen," he began, voice calm but carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the room, thick enough to silence every whisper. "You're right about one thing. I do want respect. The difference between us is how it's earned. I earn it through my work. Through how I treat people. Through example. Not through ambush. Not through theatrics. Not by forcing others into a corner." Colbert's face flushed red, his hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly the knuckles whitened. His usual controlled smile was gone. For the first time that night, his composure completely collapsed. He opened his mouth, faltered, closed it, trying to regain control, but the words wouldn't come out as intended. He began, voice cracking slightly, "I'm asking about accountability. Moral responsibility." Denzel's gaze didn't waver. Every muscle in his body spoke of composure, yet there was a simmering intensity beneath the surface, like a quiet storm ready to break. "Accountability," he said, each syllable measured, deliberate, "starts with respect. Respect for agreements. Respect for dialogue. Respect for the person sitting across from you. You wanted confrontation. You got it. But don't mistake it for compliance." The audience, now collectively holding their breath, could feel the room tilting, the balance of power shifting with every word. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned forward, unable to look away. The cameras continued to roll, capturing the raw, unfiltered moment. The production crew backstage was in controlled chaos, phones in hand, heads swiveling, signaling, whispering, trying to anticipate what would happen next. Colbert attempted one last maneuver, his voice raised in desperation, a thin veneer of aggression overlaying panic. "So you're just going to walk away? Leave without answering questions that matter?" Denzel's expression softened slightly, a quiet sadness crossing his features, but his voice was firm, resonant, unyielding. "Walk away? No. I stay true to what I am. I walk away because I refuse to participate in a performance designed to humiliate, to trap, to coerce. I came here to talk about my film, not to be a pawn in a game of ego and ratings." The words hit the audience like a drumbeat, each one echoing through the theater. Some gasped audibly, others simply stared, frozen, as though witnessing a historical turning point in real time. Colbert's hands shook slightly, gripping the edge of his desk. The mask he wore so carefully for decades had slipped, revealing raw frustration, vulnerability, and, for a fleeting moment, fear. Denzel took a measured step toward the exit, his movement fluid, cinematic. Every gesture, from the subtle adjustment of his coat to the tilt of his head, conveyed control and poise. The audience could almost hear the rhythm of his thoughts, the quiet reasoning behind every step. He paused once more, turning slowly, his eyes locking on Colbert's with a quiet intensity that cut deeper than any shout could. "Stephen," he said, voice steady, carrying across the studio with precision, "I am not a hero. I am not a symbol. I am a man. One who respects himself enough to refuse participation in deceit masquerading as dialogue. Remember that." The room was silent. No clapping, no laughter, no murmurs, just a thick, heavy pause, the kind of silence that lingers after an unexpected revelation. Colbert's face contorted through shock, rage, humiliation, disbelief, a spectrum of raw, unfiltered emotion caught on live cameras. The audience felt it all, as though the weight of the confrontation had seeped into the very air. And then Denzel walked. Step by step, deliberate and unbroken. The studio lights highlighted his silhouette against the curtain. The hum of equipment and the faint rustle of audience chairs were the only sounds. His voice had faded from the stage, but the impact of every word remained, hanging like a tangible presence in the room. Backstage, his team was waiting, coats and phones ready. Calls from reporters, journalists, and publicists were already coming in. The calm, poised figure of Denzel Washington moved through them, absorbing congratulations, concerns, and questions with the same unshakable grace he had maintained throughout the ordeal. "Denzel," whispered his agent, her voice tight with urgency, we didn't expect that." He smiled softly, almost sadly. "Some people show you who they are when the cameras are rolling," he said simply. "Tonight, we all learned something." Meanwhile, Colbert sat behind the desk, a man unraveling in plain sight. His usual wit and charm had evaporated, replaced by tension, flustered speech, and the faintest tremor in his hands. The production team whispered, signaling, trying to salvage what remained of the broadcast, but the damage was done. The cameras cut to commercial, but the energy did not shift. The audience filed out, some visibly shaken, others in awe. The world outside would soon erupt. Clips of the confrontation spread across social media within minutes. The hashtag #DenzelWalksOut began trending, a wildfire of commentary, debate, and analysis. Ratings would eventually plummet for Colbert. Advertisers would call. Think pieces would dissect every micro-expression, every pause, every word. But Denzel's focus was elsewhere. He was focused on the film he had come to promote, on the story that mattered, on the people who trusted him to tell it authentically. In interviews afterward, he remained consistent, gracious, and unflappable. "I wish Mr. Colbert well," he said, "and I hope he learns from this experience. As for me, I remain focused on my work and the people who support it." The film opened to critical acclaim. Reviewers noted the irony, a movie about redemption and second chances overshadowed by a host's inability to extend basic courtesy. But audiences responded to the work itself, the narrative, the craft, exactly what Denzel had intended all along. In the end, the night became more than a television moment. It became a defining example, the difference between authentic dignity and performative outrage, between principle and opportunism, between a man committed to his craft and another consumed by ego. One walked away with integrity intact. One was left alone, exposed, and facing the consequences of his own choices. And in that moment, the lesson was clear: respect is not demanded. It is earned, quietly, consistently, and without compromise. For those of you watching, remember this story. Remember the power of poise, of principle, and of standing your ground even when the cameras are rolling, the audience is watching, and the world expects you to conform. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you think about the kind of dignity that can exist even under pressure, make sure to engage. Hit that like button if you felt the tension, comment below with your thoughts on integrity under scrutiny, subscribe for more cinematic real-life stories like this, and share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of walking away with honor. Because sometimes, the loudest victories are the quietest ones.